my whole big argument about calling this acoustic string band music bluegrass music, to me, bluegrass music's Bill Monroe. I asked you the other day, was Flat and Scruggs a bluegrass band? Jimmy Martin a bluegrass band? Jim and Jesse, the Stanley Brothers? It's the last interview that I can remember Ralph Stanley doing for Jerry Paul, little magazine that he had. Ralph Stanley says in there plainly, we never played bluegrass. We played mountain music. Jimmy Martin's first record for Decca, Mr. Good and Bluegrass or Mr. Good and Country? Which was it? One of Flat and Scruggs' first records for Mercury, first album, The Banner Across the Top, country music. Until those bluegrass festivals came along, bluegrass music was, the entire domain was Bill Monroe, period. And then when the bluegrass festivals started getting popular and musics that were playing, you know, other people playing variations and all these other deviations, and they had, it's like I asked a young fellow back in January, I was doing a PBS thing, money raiser for a FM station up here in Roanoke, and I told that young man, I said, you're somewhere about 30 years old. I said, what would you be like, what would you be doing if right now you could do everything that Bill Monroe had done been able to do in his life? If you could play every tune that he played, that you were just as prolific a composer as he was, everything else, what would be the first thing you'd be doing? And he looked at me right there. He said, what do I mean? I said, you would try to do something to distinguish your name so people wouldn't be saying, there's the leading exponent of Bill Monroe. You'd be doing what Chris Thiele's done and go out and create your own deal out there. You know, it was just like those guys that Hazel Smith called the Outlaws. They didn't come around the Grand Ole Opry. When one of the Grand Ole Opry performers took on the attitude of the Outlaws and started wearing his blue jeans with his nudie suit jacket and a big cowboy hat on with the things out there and come in with bullshit across the marquee of his bus, because he's going to be like them Outlaws was. And that marquee on that bus sort of didn't sit very well with Wilma Lee Cooper and a bunch of those other old-timers around there, and they go to Bud Wendell's office, and the Opry star was brought into the office and said if that marquee showed up in that parking lot again, he would no longer be on the Opry. That outlaw bunch, they didn't come into the Opry. They didn't invade the country music world. They made their own stuff, and they created their own audience, just like Bela Fleck. Wonderful, wonderful job of creating his own audience in a subset of jazz music out there. If you could do everything somebody in a particular genre does, the next thing you're going to be doing is looking how to set yourself apart in it. I don't know what it's going to happen. I say the music now, you know, to me, the music's a communication skill. It's the way some guy gets together, you know, some guy from Japan gets together with some guy from England, some guy from Texas, some guy from Minnesota, some guy from New York under a tree out in Bean Blossom and sings them old songs. And when they're doing that, they go through the same kind of a spasm that Christian people go through when they say they're sharing fellowship. That's the communication skill it is. And that's what's going to keep it out there in the public consciousness all the time. Now, whether it ever, if it can internally generate itself a star, it may reach some kind of media capacity out there. I don't know. But to me, it's going to have to generate a star internally. I'm not talking about somebody that goes over and becomes popular in country music, pop music, and then comes back to its roots, because that in itself almost has a demeaning connotation. If your roots were that good, why didn't you stay there in the first place? But if it internally generates a star, maybe this guy Billy Strings is it out there. Molly Tuttle be it. Who knows?